And good evening and welcome to the Red, Gold, and Bold podcast. Back at it from all kinds of places with all kinds of people, even last minute additions. Talk about a plan that was never put together but has somehow come together. That would be Red, Gold, and Bold, episode 38. With us, as always, Eric Eager from Pro Football Focus. You can read his great work at pff.com. Eric, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's a little dark here. I thought I had my ring light working, but, so is life. Things are good here, though.
Well, that's good. That's what it's all about. In for Jeff Chadiha, who was on vacation, one Sam McDowell from the Kansas City Star, columnist. He's a big deal. You can tell he's wearing a hat in honor of filling in for Jeff Chadiha. I appreciate that, man. Well done. How are you?
Usually I only wear a hat before I've showered for the day, so until 4 p.m. But today I've already showered and still wearing the hat. And my lighting backdrop is the Royals game, so it's like occasional based on how many home runs the Astros are going to hit in these last 3 innings.
Yeah, how many fireworks are going to go off? My lighting backdrop is a desk lamp that is blinding me right now. I'll be honest with you, the way it's set up, but it's the only way I could semi-light my face from my hotel room here in Lake Tahoe, Nevada, where Sports Radio 810 WHB for people who are not KC folks, where you can read or where you can hear my show, 810WHB.com. We're broadcasting at the American Century Championships in Lake Tahoe, Nevada. So I had a chance to talk with some luminaries from the world of sports and entertainment today. That's what it was, luminaries from sports and entertainment. Maybe I'll drop some of that knowledge I got today on you fellas here. We got a lot we want to get to here in the Red, Gold, and Bold podcast. Let's start with something that was your idea, Eric. Decision-making by Patrick Mahomes. Here it is. Drop this epic bomb. You're going to say that the man doesn't know what he's doing? Is that what I should understand? By the way,
no, it's actually the exact opposite, Petro.
Okay.
I create for teams and for sports bettors, I create what I call key performance indicators. And last year, one of the key performance indicators I was looking at was always number of attempts, percentage of attempts that are thrown to contested receivers. And Kansas City was always not only first place in avoiding those, but they were 2.5 percentage points clear of the next team, which is Tampa Bay. And, we recently became privy to some data that one of our teams had been collecting for the past 3 years, which is basically, sort of looking at coverage, every single player on the field. So literally grading the one-on-one matchups between coverage players and receivers. And I looked at sort of essentially the number of snaps in which no receivers get open. And interestingly, the Chiefs were one of the better teams in the NFL, but they were top 8. So I decided to plot on a graph essentially how often do at least one of your receivers get open versus how often do you throw into coverage? And Patrick Mahomes was off the charts in that when there was a receiver open, he identified him and threw to that player better than any quarterback in football. And on the other side of the spectrum was Jimmy Garoppolo, whose receivers got open better than anybody in football, but threw still 20% of his targets or twice as many per throw as Patrick Mahomes. He would throw into coverage. So it's sort of another interesting Mahomes stat where I think last season the production for that team, for the Chiefs, was not nearly as high as some of the years that we were used to, especially 2018. But some of the processes were still there. Mahomes' decision-making was still pretty damn good last year, even though due to drops and due to, things beyond his control, we still didn't get the production that we got in other years.
Yeah.
Well,
so
I've got a question on that. How much of that would be factored into just play calling in terms of, it doesn't surprise me that the Bucs are towards the top of that list because of how many quick passes and how quickly Tom Brady releases the ball. How much is that factored into that equation?
I think it certainly matters, and that's part of the interns. They did the work on sort of optimal decision making, which sort of factors in, how long, like you said, if it's quicker passes, chances are there's sort of a sweet spot, but the longer a play is developing, the less of a chance every single receiver will be covered up. And, but the shorter, quicker passes, you can also get, for example, a running back wide open type of thing. And so you could have a player who isn't necessarily beating their coverage player, but is also uncontested, like a tight end on like a quick hitch or something like that. So there's certainly aspects of play calling that are a big deal there. Mahomes, interestingly though, right, you're looking at, there will be a lot of plays where like he'll scramble around and a defensive back doesn't lose so much as he just like the play outlasts him. And I think that that's a big part of like Mahomes's sort of, appeal, I guess, in a metric like that.
So, I'm also sorry, Soren. I'm also interested in the second piece of this, which is it broken down game by game? Because I think anecdotally, we look at the second half of that Bengals game and see that Mahomes elected not to throw to guys that we perceived on film to be pretty wide open in that game.
Well, and this is what I wanted to bring up with you guys, because I also think it reveals some of Mahomes' sort of like weakness, which is like, I think a lot of the over expected metrics for Mahomes are misleading because, like, for example, completion percentage over expected. Like, I think like you watch that Raiders game in 2020 where he like was on his game winning touchdown, he was moving the pocket to where coverage would like open up a receiver, and then the throw is trivial. Like, I think a lot of times Mahomes engineers throws where the accuracy is trivial. And so relative to other players who don't do that, his accuracy measures are going to look weaker because he creates plays where the accuracy doesn't matter that much. Yeah. But I think it highlights one of his weaknesses, which is, like relative to a guy like Rodgers or Peyton Manning or somebody like that back in the day, he doesn't throw like back shoulder plays. He doesn't throw, like, I even think that third down against the Bengals, it wasn't even that like some guys were like, there were guys who were open, but they weren't wide open. And sometimes as a fan of the Chiefs, I would like for him just to like step up and throw and use his arm and throw the ball into coverage and try to complete a ball. It always seems like, he tries to engineer wide open throws when in reality, like, he has a strong enough arm where he could just put it, on a guy, but he doesn't do that very much.
Yeah. Isn't that like, listen, I had this question. I actually was talking to Joe Theismann today, name drop, but that's what I'm doing. I'm here at a celebrity event. And I was talking about the need to throw to the running backs. And, is that something, like I said, when you look at Patrick Mahomes, would you say that there are times that he needs to just check down, right? Like just take the easy gain. Peyton Manning used to drive me crazy with the quoting you'd never go broke taking a small profit. That's true, but you don't necessarily become a millionaire or billionaire, which is what it takes to be a Super Bowl champion, right? So we all love the fact that he will make those big throws and make those big plays. And because he has that, I think he falls into that. But I think sometimes, like what I was curious when you said you had data on this and we were going to talk about it was, do you find that by taking those simple ones and basically it's like the body blows, you get the hands down off the defense. If you will take some of those 5-yard gains, if they'll hit some of those back shoulder throws, that are only 8, 9, 10-yard gains, do you find that opens up the big play? We know he's a great big hitter, but they obviously started taking that away from him. If he would go with some of the simple ones, and if the Chiefs have the talent to find somebody that you can hit on a 5-yard cross that can turn it into a 17, 18-yard gain, then you got to start defending that, and maybe that opens up the big throw. Was there any evidence towards that, whether it was him versus anybody else?
Well, I do think that, you had, I believe like Darrell Williams last year led the NFL in receiving yards on a quarterback second read or later. So he was sort of finding that sync with a running back last year, which was, I had always wanted, when I watched Brady play, like when he defeated, the Rams in 2001, it was Kevin Falk, right? When they took down the Seahawks in 2014, I want to say Shane Vereen had like 11 catches in that Super Bowl. And then, of course, the Atlanta game, we all remember James White, was terrific with all the touchdowns. He had like 16 catches in that game. I've always sort of thought the Chiefs running back passing game was like either scripted, so screens to Kareem Hunt and Damian Williams stuff. It never felt like he's naturally wanted to throw the check down to Clyde. And that was like Darrell Williams' big thing. He's wanted to throw the check down to Darrell. The problem is Darrell's like not that talented, right? He's just like get exactly what's given to you running back. And so, I wonder, because that's not going to be Ronald Jones, right? So it's got to be like Jerick McKinnon or one of these running backs they drafted or signed in free agency. I hope that that's the next evolution for Mahomes, because that was always the thing. Like I watched, the Buffalo game is kind of when I came to this realization, which was just like, when it's not there, he just dirts the ball and they get 0 yards. Where a guy like Brady will check it down to Shane Vereen or James White or somebody like that, and Leonard Fournette now that he's in Tampa, and it'll gain like 3-4 yards. And like, while that's not a successful play, it's still better than 0.
What's interesting is that Eric comes up with this data, and then Soren and I just pepper him with what other data do you have on this? The play last year to win the AFC divisional round from Mahomes to Kelsey stood out because of how unusual it was for Mahomes to throw something that was not exactly where the play was designed to get him open. He throws it off the backside of him. And I wonder if it would benefit, one, from throwing more balls that are either incomplete or caught by the offense. It's one of those two rather than a throwaway. But the other part of this is he obviously has not had the type of bodies and receivers that have aided that sort of pass. And that was the whole point of this offseason, was to get those types of receivers in-house to where he can throw maybe a few more contested catches. But we're still yet to see until the games come around whether or not he's willing mentally to put himself in that situation to do that. And given how last year went, how many balls he threw off of his own receivers that got intercepted, I still think there's going to be some hesitancy for him to actually go and follow through on that.
I think part of it is the 23 passes last year that were dropped by Tyreek Hill. Like, yes. I think that helps a lot. Like, I think that's especially like the one off of his hands that got into Von Bell's hands to end the season. Basically, you had the pick 6 by Micah Hyde against Buffalo in the first game. You had the Washington game off of I believe it was off of Tyreek's hands in the red zone. You had the Dallas interception by Jaron Kearse that was off. Like there was a number of plays that were sort of probably one of those where he's not necessarily all that angry that Tyreek's gone, just because there were the plays where he's doing everything possible and then the offense is sputtering as a result. I agree with you. Like, and they tried, right? Like they brought Kelvin Benjamin's 280-pound wide receiver in to try to be a big body guy. Cornell Powell was trying. They wanted him to be the big body guy. Josh Gordon by the time he got to Kansas City was a big body guy. And so maybe it's one of those things where, and I know Reid like prefers these sort of like speed receivers much more. I mean, even in Philadelphia, they never had a guy that was sort of a big body, kind of like you think back to like Marcus Robinson or, even like, guys who would catch the big guy fade, that weren't good at anything else. They don't have anybody like that, or even like a tight end like Gronk. Like Kelsey is very much like un-Gronk-like in the way that he plays football in a good way, but also, it's different because you like you said, that Buffalo fade was very singular last year in terms of like how different it was to throw a fade in the red zone. Like they almost never did that. And you wonder if this year with Juju's more of a bigger body and guys like that, whether or not they'll go to that.
You mentioned the Bengals game and the decision-making that was going on in the Bengals game, and Sam talking about, not throwing to guys that are wide open. I mean, how did that game stick out, right? Not to be the guy that's still harping on the loss that happened, but I do think that one's significant because it was the worst half of football we've seen Patrick Mahomes play, slapped right up against one of the better halves of football that we've seen him play. Like, how does the decision-making go from what appeared to be, as you pointed out right after that game, the Kansas City Chiefs offense, led by Patrick Mahomes, got every single yard they could get except for one in the first half. And then it was turned upside down. Like, that's not something that I think happens from defensive coordinators. That's like self-inflicted. Like, how do you make that kind of that bad a decision-making after you've been that good before?
Well, don't you think I want to bring up the data, but basically almost every play was like a 3-man rush or less, right? So, I think that this speaks to who Mahomes wants to be. Mahomes wants to throw to space, right? He wants to, and the problem is when you drop 8, and I know that the Sam Hubbard thing where like once Sam Hubbard knew he was dropping 8, and then once he knew Mahomes wasn't going to try to fit it in, he rushed. But, when you drop 8, like there's not going to be a lot of space. You're going to have to make a decision to actually throw into coverage a little bit. And, and they weren't moving. Like, I think one of the things that we've looked at with, sort of some of the NGS data is like, whether it's play action or the run game, linebackers do not move against the Chiefs anymore. Like, they don't bite on play action. They don't flow against the run. They stand there. And, it's sort of like when you play basketball, it's like in the post, like the worst thing that can happen is you don't feel the defender, right? Once Mahomes like can't see the defenders moving, he can't really like play off of them that well. And that was what the Bengals, I think, exploited in the second half of that game.
I think a ton of that goes into it because obviously it comes down to the way you're defended. I also think when you look back at the game, as far as what's going through Mahomes' head, the first two big plays of that second half were on the initial drive. Chiefs get the ball, and both dropped passes, one by Travis Kelce and one by Tyreek Hill. And it's probably worthwhile going back in the data and seeing exactly how Mahomes' statistics stacked up throughout. I mean, we've talked about, I think there was, Eric, do you recall the number off the top of your head? Was it 7 interceptions that went off of Chiefs receivers first last year?
Yeah, it was something like that. I mean, he had 40 drop passes in total. So
I think look up exactly what his performance was immediately following that, because I anecdotally it seemed like it was pretty frequent that when he had back-to-back drop passes in a game, he became a little gun shy. He trusted his receivers less because they were less trustworthy in that game. And I think that's what happened in the second half of the Bengals game. And Eric's right. I mean, there were less openings, but there were some openings that he did not want to take.
I think yeah.
Go ahead.
The fact that Hill could not be a contested catch guy that frequently anymore was a huge deal. Like,
Yeah.
And it got worse as the seasons went on.
So I asked, I mentioned talking to Joe Theismann today, and I asked him about throwing to smaller receivers, right? That I said, hey, bigger receivers give you bigger catch radiuses. And he said, well, I actually like the small, and I'm going to give you his answer, let you pick it apart. But he said, I actually like the smaller receivers. I had smaller receivers. And he mentioned Alvin Garrett, and I forget the other one, Say, I think it was, or CA. He said, they're quicker, they get more open. And so you actually have a bigger window to throw the football to. And I wanted to be like, Art Monk went to the Hall of Fame. He was the guy that went to the Hall of Fame and was really the biggest weapon you had throwing the ball. But I'm not going to argue with the guy, right, as he's sitting there. But I did think it was interesting that he made that point. And so to making the right decisions, we all think the big bodied receiver is going to be better. Is there any chance that it's not? And we're just being hypercritical or wanting to find the silver lining in Tyreek Hill leaving.
Well, no, there was a good comment in there. Zach Osborne said T.O. had a pretty big body in Philly, and I disagree. Like, Terrell Owens had bad hands. Like, Terrell Owens was wide open, and he was a freak, and the quarterbacks put it on his chest, right? Like, that is the kind of receiver that Andy Reid prefers, right? Is a guy that gets open, and the quarterback, puts it on his chest and stuff like that. He's not, like a snatch the ball out of the air type of receiver. And I think, I don't want Mahomes to get it. Like, I thought Aaron Rodgers got into these bad habits late in his career in Green Bay by freelancing and throwing to the guy's back shoulder and getting mad because, Alan Lazard couldn't do what Jordy Nelson used to do and stuff like that. Like, I just want, at the end of the shot clock, I just want Mahomes to be able to put it on the back shoulder of a guy and have a guy be able to snag it, as opposed to, not having that available to him. That's kind of my point. And I guess, like I said, I would prefer all of the Chiefs receivers be get open guys, but at the same time, it is nice to have somebody that you can sort of throw a back shoulder to, and maybe hopefully one of these guys emerges as a both, but that you want guys that can get open more than you want Kenny Galladay's on your team. Like, it's that I think is plain.
I mean, Tyreek Hill is, I think, they don't have anybody that's going to get open with their frequency. I just think when you look at the entire room as a whole, Juju, Marquez, Valdez, Scantling, whoever you pick as the number 2 out of that group, I think it's going to get more open than Byron Pringle did. And what we saw last year was the Chiefs become too dependent on the number 1. And to where, because that was the only guy that I think they had confidence was going to get open with the double teams that Travis Kelce was seeing. So to me, it's not necessarily about do they have a guy that's going to get open with the same frequency as the smaller body in Tyreek Hill. It's do they have 2 guys that could get maybe a little bit more open than Byron Pringle or Demarcus Robinson got. And that's where I think they really succeeded in the offseason.
But I think that's fine. I love your point about how, Eric brings in a bunch of data and we say, hey, give us more. But to that point, how much, have you seen either in this or in just other things, certain quarterbacks need to throw to certain kind of wide receivers, right? Because
Mhm.
I think you can make a pretty good case that Devontae Adams and Jordy Nelson are kind of similar receivers, right? Like he, and maybe that one has nothing to do with the other. And Tyreek Hill would be just incredible with the Green Bay Packers. But there seems to be kind of a guy that they like. I mean, we know the old West Coast offense was to have the bigger bodied receiver that could run the slants and run through arm tackles and all that kind of thing. But I am curious to see, Mahomes is being given some guys that have been productive. Juju, when healthy at the top of his game, very productive. And if he doesn't, we could say, well, Sammy Watkins, he didn't sync up with him, but then he won a couple more stops and hasn't really made any big appreciable difference. He actually, his best years now look like they were with the Chiefs, with the way he played. But I am interested to see if we start going, okay, he does like the Andy Reid receiver, and you just need to give him a bunch of guys like that. Like that's one of the things we'll find out with this offense. But I do think it comes down to your decision making and him having to. These are the guys he's going to throw to. He's going to have to find a way to be comfortable with them, whether he likes it or not.
I just think that Mahomes, likes throwing to the guys that are in the right spot, the guys that he can trust that are going to be in the spot where the play calls them to be. If you look at the Chiefs roster last year and you say who was most similar to Tyreek Hill body-wise, you would say McCole Hardman. I don't think we've seen a lot of trust in that relationship over the past 3 years. So I think it comes down to, what he's going to build chemistry-wise with MVS and Juju Smith-Schuster and to a certain extent Sky Moore too. But I can tell you what was interesting during OTAs. Now, Sky Moore missed the first, I think, 2 phases of OTAs because of his hamstring injury, and then came back for, I think it was the third one. I did notice a couple times that Mahomes is kind of having to direct him on where to go, including once where he was emerged from the huddle on the wrong side. Typical for a rookie, but with McCole Hardman, we haven't really seen him consistently break out of that. And so I think that the Sky Moore connection is sort of the wild card in the entire scenario because he's a different wide receiver than I think that those other guys that we're mentioning. All of the other guys that we're mentioning, he's sort of the tweener type between those guys.
Yeah.
Do you think that it's a good thing that they've thrown numbers at the position so that they're not? I mean, if McCole Hardman busts out again this year, like it's not at the end of the world if 2 out of the other 3 guys emerge and are okay. Like I think like they're just playing the combinatorics of this and saying, we need to choose 2 out of 4 here. And I'm happy that they've at least put some NFL players in those positions, in my opinion.
Well, and I think for me, I'm happy that they're not kick coverage guys, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I think the best traits of Demarcus Robinson, Byron Pringle, and certainly Marcus Kemp were covering kicks. And I think there's been an emphasis. I mean, Eric's beat this drum for a while. Other people I work with, I know, talking about like, listen, stop trying for the 109-yard kick return. Stop, trying to pin everybody down, with some perfect, punt and rally and make the tackle, or kick it off to the 1. Just bang it 5 yards deep into the end zone. Let them take a knee, play defense for 75 yards, and make it happen. And at least from an offensive standpoint, and maybe it's just the product of they're throwing so many numbers at defensive back that they feel like, hey, listen, we're going to, no matter what, have a lot of DBs that they're saying, okay, we have this luxury. We have, and they've got a couple of linebackers too that are special teams guys, but there's so many defensive backs that we're going to be surprised and go, oh, there's only 5 wideouts, or there's only 4 wideouts. Like those are the only 4, and they practice squad a couple of guys because nobody on the offense is going to get out there and play special teams. It's all going to be on the defensive side of the ball. I do think that's kind of an intriguing part of what they're going to be throwing.
All the stuff that they can control, they're not going to punt very much. The kickoffs, they have a guy with a big enough leg to kick it through the end zone. Most kickers kick it deep so you can kneel the ball. Like they might just not be a special teams team this year. Like I know when Alex Smith was the quarterback, like you needed to increase variance, but you're the 3rd best team in the NFL, more or less. Like you need the games to turn out like they're supposed to. And special teams just cause more randomness than I think a team like that should invite.
What's interesting about it is if you look at their special team snaps last year, almost all of those guys are gone. And so I have wondered, like, how many picks does Dave Tope get this year? Dorian O'Daniel's gone, Armani Watts is gone. Ben Neiman's gone. Those are all 4 phase special teams guys. That sort of leaves these openings that it either makes me wonder that Soren is going to go your direction. They're going to say, hey, we've got ways to avoid special teams being as important, or whether he is going to get some picks and you are going to see a sixth wide receiver. You know, Jalen Watson is kind of interesting. He's a 5-year guy from Tampa, plays a ton of special teams that, you know, a lot of us that have watched camp have kind of thought, well, maybe he gets in because they are going to have to pick one of these receivers that can just play special teams.
Yeah, and that's I think
a lot of text messages from me into that building saying, "Stop playing special teams." Maybe they're going to listen to me. I don't know. Stop returning the ball. Byron Pringle sucks.
I hope that's the reasoning, because I've always wanted to interview you for a story, Eric, and that would be like the perfect thing. How why the Chiefs stopped playing special teams? Text messages from Pro Football Focus.
Yeah, I like that. Their associate head coach is the special teams coach, right? So, I mean, there's obviously an opinion of it. I am fascinated to see what they do this year and how much sway the guy's given, because if it's not productive, which it really wasn't, I mean, they didn't have the kick return home runs that they wanted. And, you know, I think it's something that they've got to make a change on. If you catch this, go ahead.
Well, sorry, I just want to point out one in the Weeds media thing, but we need Dave Toub to be a big factor, because he's the guy that gives us all the information beyond what he probably should every week. And training camp in particular, we'll ask him about somebody. He'll say, yeah, but I don't think he's good. He's good at a good enough wide receiver to make the team, or something like that. So you just start writing down, okay, this guy might make it, this guy might make it. So we need Dave Toub to be a big factor in any season. We cannot.
Well, look, if he's coaching less, he can talk more. I feel like this is a win for everybody.
It's a win all around. If you're catching us via the podcast later in the week, remember we stream live normally Tuesdays at 9 p.m. with the Red Gold and Bold podcast. Almost back to our every week on the Tuesdays. We're doing it on a Wednesday because of travel, Jeff being on vacation and me traveling yesterday. But hit us up in the stream if you're on the Facebook, on the YouTube, or on the Twitch. You can be part of the chat room as well. If you hear us referring to what people are saying up here, that's from the chat room. Give us some likes, some good mentions, some retweets. The loves, those are always good for us. They don't cost you nothing, so we would appreciate it if you would do it. We've already had a number of people hit that love button, that like button, and we do appreciate it very much. Let's switch gears a little bit. What is the ceiling for the Chiefs' offense and defense? What's the floor for the offense and defense? Do you have a window, Eric, that you think that let's start the glamour side is the offense. You know, last year, offensively, overall yardage-wise, number 3, yardage-wise, but down on points, down to 28.2 points per game. You know, not as good as they've been in the past. In fact, ranking-wise, that comes in at still number 4, but it's still off a little bit. They were still very good, but there's a feeling that they were really having problems with that cover 2. What do you expect from this? What's the ceiling on this offense?
Yeah, and 5th in yards per play. You look at expected points, which is like the metric that a lot of the analytics folks they were still 1st. So, you know, when you look at like efficiency, right? And I think a lot of this is Andy Reid's run pass ratio is just so much better than other people. So like if you're not running on early downs, you're going to be, you know, those numbers are going to shine on you a little bit more. But yeah, it certainly has taken a little bit of a dive. You know, among teams that were in the top half of the league, in yards per play, the Chiefs had the highest percentage of turnovers per drive at 13.7. So that again is part of the reason why you're seeing like high efficiency, not as high a scoring type of, you know, as you're used to. I mean, the ceiling is absolutely the best offense in football. I think that the hard part is obviously the schedule difficulty, which is the hardest in football. But I think the ceiling is absolutely a top 1 offense. I think the floor is probably 10. Like I think 10th in most offensive categories is what you can expect for the floor for the Chiefs offense.
Sam, you got a ceiling and a floor?
Yeah, I was trying to look it up while Eric was talking, but Football Outsiders keeps points per drive, and I think the Chiefs still finished 1st in that category last year too, didn't they, Eric? I mean, a lot of the problem was the Chiefs' defense was on the field a lot. So it's not like he's got the same amount of turns at the basket that other teams did. I think the Chiefs absolutely, when you look at ceiling, yeah, they could be the best offense in the league. But I do agree with Eric that the schedule is going to play a factor, and they could be on paper the best offense in the league but then the actual numbers are going to show them as like fourth or fifth. But you're going to say, yeah, but they played against this defense. And then it is going to be those analytics that I'm talking about with Pro Football Focus and Football Outsiders that say, yeah, but these guys might be fifth in yardage, but they are the best offense in the league because of who they gone against. I think 10th is even low for the floor for them. You know, I don't see them finishing worse than like maybe 7th, I would say, in some of the major categories. So I guess that would be the range, 1st to 7th.
Yeah, and I think all of us are, you know, counting this with Mahomes playing the vast majority of the games. If he would be hurt in preseason and not play at all bets are off. So we're talking about, you know, based upon, you know, being mostly at their full strength. I think number one, I think the point about all the drops that were made, you know, drops that turned into picks, like what was it? 7 of his, didn't you quote that stat a minute ago, Sam? I'm sorry, I'm out of my usual setup. So I'm trying to do like 19 things.
It was
here.
something like 7 or 8 interceptions.
Yeah, 7 or 8. That were like, 75% to be caught. If you just give him those back, or if you just give him 3/4 of those back and say, okay, here's how the math should roll, you know, they might be number 1 last year. And so I think number 1 with a bullet on yards, points, everything is there. I also think that there is a chance. I still come back to Ronald Jones and not being at all an Andy Reid back, and that maybe they're finally taking a page out of the Patriots and going to pound the rock a little bit. And if they do, that burns the clock a little bit more, and maybe they will be more efficient. I also think that when we get to the defense, they may not need the points. And everybody always gets mad. Andy Reid's offenses are up there near the top all the time, and it's always, you know, Andy Reid took his foot off the gas. Andy Reid's leaning at the tape. Well, I mean, you know, if he's ranked that highly, now I think you might have a chance to actually do that with a running game that he can just pound away at. I'm curious. I also think there's a pretty good chance that they're like, we need a cheap back. He's not ideal, but he'll sign for this amount. And so I'm reading too much into it with this signing, because Ronald Jones, they're not paying him much, so they could cut him, for crying out loud. And then it'll be like, yeah, they're back with the same running backs they had last time. But I think number 1 with a bullet, and I would be stunned if they're lower than like 8, like not in the top 25%, right? Like 9 or 10 would be a doomsday scenario, but I think like 8 and still in the top 25% of the league is where I expect him to be.
One of the things that Sam said, which I thought was really, you know, it was the number of drives went down because of the way that they were forced to play offense last year, right? Which was, you know, not as many early in the season. They made a lot of big plays. You think about the touchdown to Tyreek against the Browns, the stuff against Philly, like there was a lot of explosive, but near the end of the season, like they had to grind out drives. And so that led to fewer drives. That led to a similar number of plays, actually. Like last year, they actually had more plays. Well, after you adjust for the 17 versus 16 games, they had about as many plays, but it's a drive level thing, to Sam's point, which was they didn't have as many drives because they were forced to constantly do this. Now, last year, 46% of their run plays did not include an offensive line error, which is the highest in football. None of us looked at that run game and said, oh, that's a run game where the offensive line dominated. But they dominated last year in the offensive line. I think Ronald Jones is in to put 1 foot into the ground and get 7 yards on plays where their offensive line gets blocks and when the safeties are too high and where guys, you know, like Clyde and like Darrell Williams failed last year.
I think you all had them ranked as a better run blocking unit than pass blocking unit last year. I mean, especially the interior. I mean, that turned out to be those 2 rookies' biggest strength, and they both had really good rookie years. But with Trey Smith and Creed Humphrey, they were even better with run blocking than they were with pass protection. Which, you know, look, I think it's a little bit of an indictment, or maybe not even a little bit, of what Clyde Edwards-Helaire has been for him the past couple of years. And a lot of this conversation about what's the ceiling for the Chiefs offense comes down to what are they going to get out of the running back position if teams are again going to force them to run the ball.
No, I think Patrick Mahomes needs to throw to the running backs more. I am a big believer in that I think that will open up some stuff with the wide receivers if guys have to be looking at the running backs and rally up and tackle.
Ronald Jones is not that guy, though. So if that's
he's not.
It's going to have to be one of the other guys.
Yeah, he's not. But I also think the other page is like, be diverse. And I think for all the things Andy Reid gets credit for, and I think he's a brilliant play caller. I think he's a brilliant, he's a fantastic week of game planner. And I think his off seasons are tremendous, right? Like that's when I think we'll know that he's lost his fastball. If he doesn't have the anecdote for the cover 2, then I think you start saying, Is he finding, is he just letting it all ride on Pat, or is he finding, because I think his off seasons are great. He always comes back and you're like, wow, look at him blowing everybody up early, right? Like that's one of the things that he does. But I think that they have to pound the rock. I think they have to be more diverse. And that means doing some things that maybe Andy Reid doesn't love doing. And I think look, I remember talking to Dick Vermeil about Mike Martz, and everybody gave Mike Martz all the credit when Vermeil won the Super Bowl, and he got back there. But then everyone went, well, the problem is by the time Martz was fired, it was, well, he's run amok. Without Dick Vermeil, he can't hold his water, and it all blows up. And I remember talking to Dick Vermeil about it, and I said, what was it like? And I was fishing around for that exact thing, but I didn't want to be like, hey, did Mike Martz implode because you weren't there to talk some sense into him? Right. I didn't ask him like that, but I just fished around with him. And I was like, how about Martz? I said, all the great plays. He's like, he had nothing but great things to say about Mike Martz. And I said, but how about, like, did you ever find yourself like, hey, let's run the ball? He's like, yeah, there are a couple times I'd have to get on the headset and say, 28's in the backfield. Let's give it to him. Let's just give him one. And I think there's an element of that. Like, that's the difference between, say, Dick Vermeil having Mike Martz, because Dick Vermeil's got the hammer and he can pull him back. If Andy Reid doesn't want to pull back, nobody can pull him back. And I think that's a bit of a scary, that could be the scary thing. And that could be what we watch this year. If it's same old, then I think that could be concerning.
Do you think, though, that this is a concerted effort to avoid doing that? Like that Ronald Jones is one. Obviously, Clyde is another one. I don't know how much Clyde's injury had hurt him last year. Then you have McKinnon, who was wonderful in the playoffs. But to your point, like they just didn't use him that well or frequently enough, I thought, in the Bengals game. Do you think? Because my biggest thing with the trade of Tyreek Hill, the reason that I think it was the right move is that it caused a real change in how they needed to operate. Like if it caused this is not going to work the Chiefs could have just continued to like grind out and get 2% better at what they were always doing and fall into all those same habits. But like that trade forced them to legitimately rethink what they were, their whole approach to football. And, he's done this before when he had Brian Westbrook, like that was a featured player in that offense. When he had LaShawn McCoy, that was a featured player in that offense. Back with the Eagles, not with the Chiefs, but the personnel is going to dictate, in my opinion, like a change to his orientation towards coaching football, I think.
Yeah,
but
to
me, go ahead, sir.
Well, I was just saying to not be, listen, as Chiefs fans, which everybody on this podcast tonight is, I think it's easy to say this is all gonna work. That's one of the reasons why we have Jeff, because Jeff pulls Eric and I back from, it's all great. And we'll say, well, wait a minute, here's the big picture. And so I try to do that, and I'll try to do that for Jeff here with him on vacation, is that like that all sounds great. Like, the reason they traded Tyreek Hill, come on, the reason they traded Tyreek Hill is because they signed everybody else. And he outperformed what they could afford. Like we can, we can find the silver lining, but they never, ever would have traded Tyreek Hill if they could afford it. So like, I do think if they come down, and that's why I say, what is the floor? They lost what is, the firepower, the Deshaun Jackson that Andy Reid had when he was playing good football in Philadelphia. It is entirely possible that is a mistake. And I think that's why this is an important year for Andy Reid's legacy as well, because he's done great things. He won the Super Bowl. He's clearly, and I'm not saying he's going to come down, but if he's going to keep creeping up towards Bill Belichick, then this offense needs to be every bit as good as last year's and probably better to show that, okay, yeah, Tyreek Hill was great, but Andy Reid made him great. And it's his ability and his play calling that makes it all come together. I think that's, what's at stake on Andy Reid's legacy. It's about winning football games and winning championships for the Chiefs. But him, he's always going to be known as an offensive guy. And so if the offense sputters and they win a championship defensively, I think that'll be one thing. You say, okay, well, he gave up Tyreek Hill, but he can still coach a team where the defense gets better. But if he finds a way to be explosive on offense, it adds to the legend of Andy Reid.
Mm-hmm. I thought they traded Tyreek Hill because he only got 3 targets in the Ravens game, right?
Sorry to step on your comedic timing. I knew you wanted to get that one in there.
I think that the bigger thing with Tyreek Hill is I don't think it's the reason they traded him, but to build off of what Eric said, I think a great side effect of the move is that they have to become less predictable by the fact that he is no longer on the roster. And I didn't think that Tyreek Hill's talent was any sort of problem, but his talent being there made the Chiefs predictable. And I think just by him being gone, they're going to have to be less predictable. They do not have a number one wide receiver. They're not going to feed a guy 120 targets, 150 targets next year.
No, I would agree. All right, let's go to the defensive side, Eric. Ceiling, floor for the defense.
I think ceiling is probably, and it depends upon how we measure this. This Spagnuolo team has been, top 10 in points allowed, but like bottom of the league in yards per attempt and EPA and all that stuff. So
last year, the raw counting numbers, just so people know, number 8 in points allowed, number 27 in yards allowed.
Right. So, and that's been a lot of what Spags has done, right? Which is, limit things in the red zone and stuff. I would say, so take the average of that and say like maybe they're, 15th or something. I would say, top 8 is the ceiling. Defense is weird in the NFL, right? You don't have to be that good to be that good. And, I think the floor is, another bottom feeder, like 25th, let's say. And a lot of that hinges on whether or not they get any pass rush from the Karloftises and the Joneses and the Frank Clarks of the world.
Sam?
Well, I was going to ask what metric are we going by, because points and yards are a completely different metric for Spags. I mean, let's take yards. I don't think they can finish top 10 in yards against. So I'm going to say 12th is the ceiling for yards. And I think 30th is the floor for yards. I mean, if everything doesn't fall into place, and you and I have talked about it on your show, Soren, but I am significantly concerned about the Chiefs pass rush. I think it was their biggest issue against the Bengals last year in the AFC Championship game, and it was not an anomaly that was an issue against the Bengals. And I don't think they did enough to address it. They're putting a whole lot of weight on the shoulders of a first-round draft pick who's never played an NFL snap, who I think is limited athletically. I think he's going to be a solid player, but I don't think he's going to be just a game wrecker, which is the type of player they needed if they were not going to replace both defensive ends. And they elected only to address one side. And therefore, I still think they have too many problems with how long the quarterback's going to have to throw the football to be a top 10 defense and yards.
On the raw yardage measurements, I think how good the offense is. I think, playing defense with a great offense, yardage-wise, you're going to give up more because your offense is going to score quicker. You're going to have to defend more plays. And particularly if your offense is playing from in front, there's all kinds of superfluous yards that get thrown out there. So, it's about, there are all the advanced metrics and different ones that are put out there for. And so just, not saying yards or just points, but points are more important than yards. Somebody's asking, I think the question, they said yards or yards, but I think Aaron meant what's more important, points or yards. Whoops, that wasn't it. And obviously it's points, right? Like that's more important, but yards leads to points, right? To score, you have to, overcome all the yards between you and the goal line. And so I think the yards are important. I think that gets poo-pooed away too much. I think that's why the Chiefs defense wasn't great, because they gave up so many yards. And I think their offense could be even better. It's complementary football. They need to get stops and give the ball back to the offense. But the offense, if they possess it longer, that keeps their defense off the field. So just raw counting numbers, yardage-wise, are going to get better. I give a little more upside to this. They've played, instead of looking at it, I don't think enough is being put into what McDuffie can do, right? It's always been, look at all the talent the Chiefs, look at all the production they get from their secondary, and they haven't really invested in it. And so that became their game plan, which we know, at least if it didn't irk Brett Veach, it was a point of emphasis that he wanted to correct when he had his end of season thing. Hey, opportunity hasn't presented itself. And to your point, Sam, about the other defensive line, I definitely think Brett Veach and the Chiefs wanted to do a lot more on the defensive line, and opportunity didn't present itself. To which I think in the long run, we'll say, okay, that's a good thing, because they didn't go Frank Clark it again. What's the best thing that's out there? And whatever it takes to get it, we're going to go do it. which again, when they did that for Frank Clark, I don't mind as much because I think he was better that year than D Ford, and that was the difference between a championship and not a championship. But this time, that's not the scenario that they're in. They're in a scenario where they need to make the right choice, and I think, for me, Karlaftis has a chance to be good to very good, and that'll be an upgrade. Even if Frank Clark sucks, they're upgraded on one side, and that's better than they were on the other because he sucked last year. And if they get better on one side, that's an improvement. But McDuffie is the guy that if you have Snead and McDuffie plays up, not even to what Marcus Peters was, I don't think he's going to be the gambler and have as many big plays, but he's a more solid corner. Him and Snead give them a chance to be much better in the secondary. The linebacking core, I think, gets better by subtraction. No more Anthony Hitchens, who I like, but Nick Bolton is better, I believe, at every facet of the game. Every facet of the game. Now, we're going to see. If they line up in the wrong defense all the time and he's wearing the green dot, okay, we see why they were reluctant to give it to him. But coverage, he may not be great, but he was better than Hitchens. Pass rush, better than Hitchens. And thumping runners, better than Hitchens. Willie Gay Jr., 2 years in the system, can't help but be better. And I think when you add in the Wisconsin kid,
Chanel.
Who?
Leo Chanel.
Yeah, Chanel. Thank you. When you add him in, I think if you come up against a team that thinks they're going to pound the rock on them, they're going to get hit a lot more. So I agree. They didn't get done what I think they kind of advertised as priority number one of what they wanted to do. But I do think that the personnel upgrades are significant. And so I think the ceiling, now that's a lot of babbling to get to, I think the ceiling is number 5. I don't think they're going to be top 4. But I think the floor, I don't think it's 30. I think the floor is like 24, right? You keep him out of the bottom quarter.
I just want to Eric his hand immediately as soon as you said top 5. He's like, wait a minute, I got to get in on this.
Well, so one of the things that I found really remarkable about the Bengals last year, so the team that played in the Super Bowl for the AFC, right? I like to look at these things. The Bengals last season had on their roster, I believe, 6 players who had played 1,000 snaps for another NFL team in the secondary. So you had like Trey Waynes, you had Von Bell, Chidobe Awuzie, Eli Apple, Trey Flowers, and I'm blanking on the last one, Mike Hilton. So they had 6 guys on that team that had and Ricardo Allen, my friend, 7, right? They had 7 players who had played a full season starting in the league in that secondary, and they spent minimal amount of money except for Trey Waynes on all those guys, and then they put the big dollars into Trey Hendrickson, and that was the formula. That wasn't a great defense, but it was a good enough defense, right? The Chiefs have kind of done similar things, right? At linebacker, they got, and I can't remember the 2 guys' names. Sam might be able to. The 2 veteran guys, the one guy they got from Carolina, and then they had Elijah Lee, I think, from Cleveland to back up at linebacker.
Main Carter is the one,
and again, those are NFL players. And then in the secondary, you threw a bunch of draft picks at it, like McDuffie and Cook, and some of the later guys,
Josh Williams,
Johnson and Jalen Watkins.
Josh Williams, I think, is going to play. Yeah,
Josh Williams, 4th round pick from a Division II school who has all the athleticism and the length that McDuffie doesn't. They're complementary pieces. But then you also got Reid, and you got Lonnie Johnson from Houston as well. And again, none of these, I think what the cool thing about this Chiefs defense is they finally understood, I think, or they're even supercharging what they've always done, which is we're going to throw numbers at the secondary, and we just need 5 of these dudes, 6 of these guys to be good. And if Lonnie Johnson sucks, then you can cut him. If Lonnie Johnson's great, that's awesome. If Rashad Fenton plays well, that's cool. Like last year, they got Mike Hughes, and Rashad Fenton was better than him, so they just played Rashad Fenton. And I think that they have the numbers to do that in a more robust way in the secondary. I think that the one thing I'll challenge a lot of people with it on the front 7 is last year they understood their personnel sucked on the front 4, and they got creative personnel wise. They put Chris Jones at defensive end. They tried a bunch of things that didn't work. I think that a similar they're aware of these things. I don't think that they're going to get creative personnel wise the same way they did. Like Chris Jones isn't playing defensive end anymore. But they might get creative from a scheme standpoint, knowing that they have to manufacture pressure. So you might see like Chanel playing in a 3-3-5 in the sub packages, rushing the pass as a blitzer. You might see more from Willie Gay blitzing. You might see Frank Clark playing like a 3 technique because he can't get pressure off the edge anymore. You might see more creativity because they're not a team that doesn't get what the problem is defensively up front.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point because, Soren had talked about that Willie Gay and Nick Bolton are better blitzers than the pass linebackers. They combined for half a sack last year, but I don't think they had a lot of opportunity because they were filling in for guys that could not do, what they were number 2 basically on the depth chart for.
What was it really that low?
I think they combined for half a sack last year.
That scares me. Yeah, that stuns me and scares me.
I also think the other piece though on the pass rush, because I guess I'm more concerned about it than maybe you guys are, but part of, Stern, even when you went through your scenarios, was sort of the assumption that Frank Clark is even what Frank Clark was last year. And we've seen him every year regress since he's been in Kansas City. And I don't even think you can just assume that you're going to get what you got last year out of Frank Clark, which was at least what was like a 4-game stretch where Frank Clark played like Frank Clark did his first year in Kansas City last year. But other than that, you didn't see much out of him. Also, they don't really have the depth that they had there. Even then Alex Okafor is gone. I mean, I think a lot is going to be dependent on what they're able to put on the quarterback. And I think that's a gigantic worry for them going into the year.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. All right, let's wrap it up with this. The schedule. What's the most important part of the schedule? You can take it any way you want. There's one game, a stretch of games. What is the most important part of the Chiefs schedule as you look at it, Eric?
Yeah, it's man. There are a lot of different parts where
or I'll go first if you want. I mean, if you don't
not
want
a reprieve, but I'll go here. The Broncos, okay. Texans, Seahawks, Broncos, Raiders. The end of the season, I think that they're going to be very Patriots-like in how they approach things. In that, like, remember in Belichick, they would start 2-2 and they lose to Jacksonville and Detroit, and everybody's like, "Oh, what's wrong with the Patriots?" It's like, well, they're just screwing around, right? And then they finish the season strong. I think that the goal for the Chiefs is to get to this last 5 games, 6-5 or something like that, 7-4. And then these last 5, I think they got to go 4-1 or better, right? And if that happens, I think that they're probably in a good position to do what they want to do. But to me, that's when the schedule lightens up on them, right? I think the Broncos are going to be a little overrated this year. Obviously, Texans, Seahawks are both terrible, and I think by week 18, we're all going to wonder why the hell the Raiders win all in this year. So, like, that's going to be the schedule part for there. Like, just get to that end of the season near 500 and then smash at the end. All
right, Sam.
Everything I read from Eric on Twitter, I'm surprised he didn't pick February 12th as the most important game next year. But I think, you mentioned the Raiders. I think the Raiders are overrated. I actually think the Broncos are a little bit overrated too. So I know there's all this talk about the AFC West. It's undoubtedly more difficult than it was last year. It's undoubtedly more difficult than the average NFL division. I don't think it's just quite the Murderer's Row that people are making it out to be. But I think the Chargers are legit. And I know that's something we hear a lot of people say every year, but I do think that the Chargers are going to be the Chiefs' biggest competition. So in that vein, I actually think it's the inverse of Eric. I think it's the start of the season. I think it's that week 2, 3, 4 against the Chargers. You go to Indy, which is an improved team, and you go to Tampa. So I think that's also where we saw the Chiefs slip last year, and it's in that slip lasted for quite a while. So I think how they handle that first month of the season is going to be pretty key.
I should have gone first or second and got in there in front of Sam because that's where I'm at. And I'll say the first 4 games, right? Because it doesn't mean they're over if they get off to a slow. It's over because they get off to a slow start because they had that last year. They had that back in whatever year it was, 15 when they started 1-5. They can overcome it. But I think the key is if you come out and you hang a 4-0 before you ever see AFC West, or at least a 3-1. The boogeyman lives, right? But if you come out and you stumble to 1-3 with 3 road games at Arizona, home for the Chargers, at Indy, at Tampa, You only find a way to win one of those games. Like, number one, mentally, it's a drain to dig out of that hole. And it's definitely not the game plan. And note that the Chiefs did it last year in 21, and they did it in 15. They don't make it a regular thing, right? Mm-hmm. Normally they come out and they jump on teams and they get out to the lead and they run away from this.
Mahomes had never thrown an interception in September before last year, right?
Yeah. So I think it's important for them to get back to doing that and to establish that, no, we're still the big dog. Because if you go to the Raiders, and I think the Raiders are due for a regression. I mean, they had all these close wins last year, so I think they're due for a regression. But even just getting to Buffalo, right, and having to play the Bills. But then when you get into the teeth of the schedule, like if you've lost to Arizona and the Chargers are getting you and knowing that they got a chance to put you down 2, like, that's bad news. It's important to beat Arizona because of that. Like, getting to Buffalo and having a good record so Buffalo knows there's no margin for error. You have to be on your game. Because I think if you give any comfort to these other teams, I think it's problems for Kansas City. I think it's early. They got to be effective early and often.
What, Eric, you might know this off the top of your head, but sort of the betting market, I mean, you look at those first 4 games, what's the largest line that the Chiefs are going to have in those first 4 games? 3.5?
Yeah. So they're favored. They're getting money here against Arizona, as Sam said, where they begin and end the season. They're laying 3, so minus 165. So you're looking at 60-ish% chance to win that game. But that's like it's probably as good as it gets. So they're laying 3 at home, minus 155 against the Chargers. So again, kind of right around 60% there. The Indy game, which is a game I think we're all going to, or at least I will pressure you all to going to.
I go to them all, Eric.
Oh, okay. In that game, the Chiefs are laying 2.5, minus 135 in Indy. Yeah, you're looking at basically, and then the last one is Tampa Bay, right? The Chiefs are 2.5-point underdogs there. Soren knows that when they're a field goal underdog, I will drive to different states and make bets. So that one's interesting because I actually think the Bucs are going to kind of suck this year. Like, I have a big bet on them to win the division, but that was before Brady came back officially. I think that team is 1 foot out the door type of team. But to Sam's point, like, they're 60-40 to win their first 3 games ish, and then they're 40-60 to win against Tampa. So you think about, you simulate that out, the expected number of wins is probably roughly around like 2.5. So if they could go 3-1 in that stretch, like that's a pretty important, start. If they go 4-0, I mean, we're finding out what the weather's like in February 12th in Glendale, I feel like.
I just learned from this conversation. We brought Eric on our side for this, Soren, by the end of it.
Yeah, I like it as well.
Give you a chance to change it.
Yeah. I like it because I can cover the Super Bowl and I think probably just stay there and do my first week of spring training and make it one trip and not have to do back and forths from Arizona. So that'll be nice, Eric. That'll be nice. I appreciate
thinking about you the whole time.
Thank you. By the way, if you're booking for Glendale and you need to Airbnb it, Surprise, Glendale is one of the ones that's actually not far from Surprise. So at least getting to the stadium, all the activities I'm sure will be in downtown Phoenix. So there it is. We're booking for the Super Bowl right here in July. That makes it pretty simple. That's going to do it for us here on Red, Gold, and Bold. First, we want to thank Sam McDowell from the Kansas City Star for filling in for Jeff Chadiha. We look forward to having Jeff back next week when we hit the podcast. Eric Eager from Pro Football Focus. Check out his work at pff.com. I subscribe to the Star, by the way, Sam. What's the easiest way to get to read your stuff? Is it kcstar.com?
That's kansascity.com. We own the city.
Kansas City. Okay, yeah. kansascity.com. Yeah, that's nice. That's impressive. And you can catch my work at 810whp.com. We appreciate it. Remember those nice comments, the likes, the loves. Go a long way for us and don't cost you nothing. We would appreciate it if you do it there. Remember, we stream live usually Tuesdays at 9 p.m. Central with the Red, Gold, and Bold. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.